Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Front End Ka podcast. So I know that last time that I spoke to you guys on Twitter, on YouTube, etc., I said that I was going to do a book review of Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga, but unfortunately that's taking a bit of time, and I kind of felt that I had a creative block doing that. So I thought it would be a better idea to, in the meanwhile, do one of these podcast episodes and talk about an issue which I think most of you guys will find really interesting because it kind of affects us or not exactly affects us. It's something that many, if not most of you, are involved in social media, or someone who's involved in all of this, or at least there's an influencer or a certain popular personality who you follow on social media who is part of this entire subject. So what we're going to talk about today is the faction situation, the different divisions and groups which have formed in the Hindu right online, right? And we'll talk about what the beliefs of all these different groups are, what do they agree upon, what do they disagree upon, what do they fight over, etc., etc. And after all of that, I'll also talk a bit about how things might change in the future, and which groups I think have the upper hand right now, and which groups might actually be able to push back and kind of maybe gain more followers or grow more and stuff like that. So to begin with, I think there's primarily a threefold division in the Hindu right now. Okay, I'm talking about the online Hindu right, which is the most influential in terms of how young people generally tend to think, or you can talk about things like Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, but no, Facebook not so much, because Facebook is, again, it's primarily for a very, very mainstream and sort of older audience. But definitely Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, even Instagram. So anyways, the primary three divisions which exist are Raytas, Trads, and the third one is Blackpillers, as many of you would call them, right? So we'd begin with Raytas, because Raytas are the most firmly established and they are the oldest grouping amongst all of these people. So who exactly is a Rayta? So Rayta, of course, as you can understand, right, it's a play on the word right wing itself, right? So people started calling these people Rayta wingers, right? Because of a bunch of reasons. So the thing with the Raytas or the Rayta wing is that they are absolutely pro government, pro Modi, pro BJP, pro party line. They will not they will not criticize the party even if it does something which is against even mainstream Hindutva ideals. Like, for example, something as basic as the right of temple authorities, I mean, like, for example, traditional temple priests to manage their own temples, right? So they would even argue about subjects like that from a pro government point of view, if it's a BJP government which is involved in taking over temples, or pushing for more bureaucratic control over those temples. So these are the kind of people who would never really raise their voice against the government, or at least 99.99% of the time, even though they know that if you go by principles, the government is doing something which is against the ideology itself, right? So these people, and now the interesting question is, why do they do that? Why is it something about personal gain? Is it brainwashing? Is it because they feel cornered that there's only one savior who can help them out? So I think on the basis of this question of why they behave like this, why do they act like this, we can then further classify them into different groups, right? So first of all, among the Raytas themselves, I think we have obviously the IT cell, right? And the IT cell may or may not technically exactly be working for the BJP IT cell. It might be some people who are indirectly working with them, but somehow they have some kind of probably monetary gain which they're getting out of it, or maybe some kind of political influence, some kind of business influence, something or the other, which probably has monetary or political value, is what is being distributed to these people we call the IT cell. So these people actually have a lot of their own vested interests involved, and that explains. So if you look at most of these mainstream big IT cell guys, so for example, you look at someone like maybe Rishi Bagdi, or you look at someone like Anshul Saxena, or these kind of people, it, and even many times you will see a lot of personalities like common sports persons, or even like normal small time celebrities who don't really have anything to do with politics. Their entire timelines will be filled with retweets of Nitin Gadkari, Piyush Goyal, different ministers, Amit Shah, Narendra Modi, this and that, right? And there's a pretty standard format which they follow many times of particular, there's a particular way that they tweet that I'm so glad that our whatever great prime minister has done such and such master stroke, and now we all Indians will be looking forward to such a great future and this and that. But and it's quite obvious, it's pretty easy to make all of that out, but basically the core IT cell guys are the ones who do this the entire day, and like this is their only job. They are not really known for anything else, right? Maybe they were failed media personalities, maybe they were failed liberals or whatever, but right now this is the only thing which they do, and it's pretty obvious that this is probably how they make a living, right? So there's absolutely no point expecting any serious intellectual discourse from these people, or for them to ever really go against the party line, ever question the BJP government. There is like absolutely no hope of them doing that. Then after the IT cell, we have a certain group of people, which is more interesting, but which also has a certain overlap with other Rayta groups, and this is the Neoliberals, right? So the Neoliberals have like completely brought, they've completely bought into this idea that everything about India has been bad till now, primarily because we have not followed US style neoliberalism, right? And okay, so like for some of you who may be politically savvy, you may understand what neoliberalism is, what neoliberalism means. Some of you may not. So neoliberalism is nothing but a set of ideas which sort of combines things like maybe like extreme dedication to protecting intellectual property rights, extreme dedication to protecting free markets, extreme opposition to government regulations and public sector companies, extreme devotion to enlightenment ideas, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to convert to whatever religion you want, freedom to say whatever you want. And now the thing is, I mean, obviously a lot of these ideas fundamentally are good ideas, right? But there has to be a certain point where you say that, okay, fine, like capitalism is all nice and great, but beyond a certain point, when you have monopolies emerging, beyond a certain point when you see that our country cannot really cope up with this pace of privatization, and there's a lot of suffering among the middle class and among small businessmen which is going on. So you say that maybe we should slow down, we should take inputs from people who are being adversely affected by this. But this is something which neoliberals don't really want to do, and neoliberals again are also very averse to taking religious conservative ideas very seriously. So for them, religion is something which just belongs inside your home. It's not something which should have anything to do with the government. The government shouldn't care if the religion is collapsing, or if the religion has become completely diluted version of what it used to be, etc., etc. Right? So and the thing is, neoliberals are extremely, I think, powerful these days through whatever, like different multinational consulting firms and economists and professors, etc., etc. So they've gotten involved in a lot of heavy duty policy making with different ministries, with the Niti Aayog, and they're quite influential these days. And even if you talk in terms of the number of newspaper columns or magazine articles which they can write, so they do have like that heft to them. They do have like the government's ear. They are taken very seriously. So they are a powerful section of the, I guess, the Rayta wing. But then again, the only thing is that some of these things they take a bit too far. They're a bit absolutist with many of these ideas and ideals, right? And moving on, then so we had the IT cell, we had the neoliberals, and then we have there's a group of people who are followers of many heterodox sects. Now, what do I mean by heterodox sects? Heterodox sects, I just mean in opposition to orthodox sects, like the exact opposite of that, right? So, for example, if I had to explain it with an example, so imagine people who are diehard followers of Sadhguru. Like, for example, for these people, everything which Sadhguru says is the correct version of their religion, whether they want to call it Hinduism or not. And the scriptures are of no use for these people, right? And not just Sadhguru. I mean, there that's just one example, but there are many other examples of these heterodox sects. Another one might be the Arya Samaj, right? So for the Arya Samaj, again, the teachings of the interpretation of the Vedas which they have, they think that is the completely correct interpretation. And they have these beliefs like traditional Hinduism has idol worship, and they think that that's not the real Vedic religion and all of that kind of stuff. And they're also again opposed to the birth-based caste system. So they oppose that as well. And traditional Hinduism and Orthodox Hinduism obviously has a birth-based caste system. And it's because of all these different heterodox beliefs that these people are generally not very fond of traditional orthodox gurus of Hinduism. And they also tend to support a lot of government policies and practices which are forcefully trying to dissolve Hindu castes or a certain orthodox Hindu practices, right? And because of all of this, they get a lot of flack from the traditionalists, obviously, who are basically the group of people, the faction we're going to talk about next. And associated with these heterodox sect people are also a bunch of people who you can just kind of call Hindutva light, or you can kind of say maybe Sangh Hindutva light. So these people don't really, I mean, they don't seriously believe in Orthodox Hinduism. They kind of believe that Hinduism is whatever you feel like it is at that particular moment. They think that Hinduism is basically all encompassing in the sense that any and every ideology or ideal can be Hinduism if you look at it from a certain point of view. And because of that, these people actually have a very popular and mass following. And they also seem to have quite a powerful sway over the party and the government. Last but not the least, we have this kind of very strange, weird group, which I'm talking about as a separate group because of how strange these people are. These are basically the self-proclaimed Devis slash Shaktis. So basically, these are generally, I guess, older, middle-aged kind of women who, many of them don't even really live in India right now. And their entire game is very similar to the heterodox sect followers. They think that Hinduism is just hippie, spiritual, wish-wash, whatever you want and feel at that particular moment. Hinduism has no definition, and it's undefinable. There's no need to study the Vedas or any scriptures. None of that. All of that is puritanical nonsense. So these people are, again, and these people although they're not influential exactly, but I guess because of the female card, they're able to garner a decent number of followers, and they have like people who are called simps, basically handles and accounts who agree with everything they say and sort of kowtow towards them, because again, to basically get female attention from them. So they do have a small circle of influence, but again, I think most like serious thinkers, serious people actually think that they're a laughing stock. They have no idea what Hinduism is. They don't have any idea of what real political thinking is, and then they don't really belong to any ideology as such. So they're more of an amusement rather than a significant, like serious faction or subgroup. So moving on, next we'll talk about the trads, the traditionalists. So the trads are, like, if I had to give you a very simple definition, the trads are basically a group of people who think that the scriptures are supreme, right? When we want to understand our religion and our society, and they also think that obviously since the scriptures are supreme, they should govern how Hindu society operates and how the Hindu state as well operates. So these people obviously hold the Vedas, the Dharma Shastras, the Upanishads, the Gita, Ramayana, all of the different Hindu texts that we have, the primary Hindu texts that we have. They hold them in extremely high regard, and they think that even in modern times, Hindus should not deviate from these texts, and that we should rely on orthodox gurus for example, the Shankracharyas of the four different mats which were established by Adi Shankracharya. So they think that these Shankracharyas are the right gurus to actually tell us what exactly Hinduism is according to an orthodox interpretation. What exactly do the Dharma Shastras say about how we should live our lives, and how should the state be running? And because of this, they get into a lot of antagonisms with other factions, especially Raytas, because as I told you earlier, Raytas are these people who think that Hinduism is whatever I feel is convenient at that moment, or whatever hippie dippy shit my guru told me. And the trads, on the other hand, strictly, very literally go by the scriptures and go by what their orthodox schools gurus tell them. So there's a lot of fighting which tends to happen online among these two groups. So like trads, this is like an overarching term. So within trads also, obviously there are different subgroups and different factions which operate. So if I just had to give you a few examples of subgroups, which, I mean, this is like the kind of mental classification that I have of them. It's I'd say one is the scholars. So these are traditionalist scholars who basically they'll, for example, they'll quote a certain, like a portion of a scripture in Sanskrit, and they'll translate that, and they'll give you some commentary over it, and then they'll tell you what is the lesson that you learn out of this. And that's how they operate, right? So they generally don't go around trying to look for a fight. They don't try to necessarily tell people that this is right and this is that you're doing something wrong in your life and you should do it this way. I mean, they basically try and keep to themselves, and they just basically try to spread knowledge about the orthodox point of view and the scriptures as they were traditionally interpreted. So these are the scholars, okay? And so many of these handles have like a decent amount of following. Some have 3, 4, 5,000, even 10,000 followers, right? And you can kind of say even someone like True Indology, who's operating under a different handle name right now, but even he can be kind of called a traditionalist scholar, even sometimes he gets into fights with other sub-factions of traditionalists. So this was the sub-faction called the scholars. And then we have a group which is probably the most famous or the most infamous, like whichever, it depends on which side of the aisle you're on. So this group is basically the teen trads, okay? And I call them teen trads because not necessarily because all of them are teenagers, but because firstly a sizable portion of them are teenagers, and secondly because even though like all of them might not be teenagers, they generally tend to be very young people, and they exhibit certain characteristics of a young crowd. For example, they're very very tech savvy. So these teen trads, they like you might just get into an altercation with maybe like two or three of them, and you'll quickly see that there's like an entire horde which is mobilized to basically take you down in that argument, because because they have all these different groups operating on Telegram, Discord, etc., etc., and many of them also obviously have a number of alts. So again, they're very tech savvy, they're extremely belligerent, they're very confrontational, they do not shy away from telling you that you're absolutely wrong, you don't know anything, and even and of course, like some of them even get quite abusive sometimes, and even though I personally think that that's probably not something which you should do. Again, that's not something which only some trads do. That's also something which many Raytas do, or many Blackpillers also do. Blackpillers are again like a faction which we'll talk about next. So these are the teen trads, and I mean their primary activities are, again, as I said, confronting people who do not follow their idea of what is Orthodox Hinduism, and living life according to the scriptures, and the state should obviously be subservient to scriptural authority, right? So they're very confrontational with these people and these different factions. And even though most of these teen trads don't really have a very large following, they tend to make up for that by their sheer ferocity. They're very ferocious. They're not afraid of confrontation, as I said. And again, as I said, they are very tech savvy. So that kind of helps them make up for their lack of numbers. And the other thing is that they've also been growing very rapidly in recent months, or rather recent years. I mean, I've just observed it over like the last couple of months, but I think it's been happening over a couple of years now. So I think probably in the future, maybe as these guys grow older, they will try to consolidate their strength, and maybe not be as confrontational as they are currently, and build followers. And maybe it's like a trajectory. Maybe many of these guys start as teen trads, and then they become scholars and whatnot. Then the next category we'll talk about is a group called the Chadpillers, or they're sometimes mockingly called the Chadpillers, right, with an E instead of an A. So the Chadpillers are basically these bunch of guys who have a very high opinion of themselves. They basically think that they're some sort of modern day Hindu superheroes, in a way that they can take down a mob of 1,000 Islamist rioters, and they are basically the counter to extremists from the other side, and like the opposition is nothing for them. And you'll kind of hear them bragging about these things, that such and such relative of mine is a politician, or has like this many 100 acres of land, or they'll tell you that I lift 100 or kilos or whatever in the gym, and that and a bunch of things, that my family has this much money, and then I can beat all of you up. And I mean, that's a very crude kind of example, but you kind of get the idea. These people, I mean, let's just say that humility is not their strong point, right? And most of the time they go around lecturing people about what Hinduism is, and what and again, this is common to them and other trads as well. They tell people what the traditional view of scriptures is, and how Orthodox Hinduism operates, and how people should live their life according to scriptures, etc., etc. But the only thing is that these people do it with an absolute lack of humility, and because of that, many times what they say and what they do tends to be very counterproductive, right? Because obviously you don't want to be talking to a person who is acting like a smug know-it-all the entire time, right? So I personally don't think that, like, for the entire like trad movement as a whole, I don't think that these people are a good addition or like a good subgroup to have, because again they kind of piss people off and turn people away from the entire movement. So now that, just to kind of recap, we had the scholars, the teen trads, the Chadpillers, and again, like there's, I mean, just as an afterthought, as an after mention, we can talk about people who I'd say are trad lights. So these are again also, these are pretty normal people. I mean, like 70-80% of the time they are not necessarily pontificating over scriptures, and they are not necessarily talking about a particular lecture by some Shankaracharya and other. They are talking about other things like the economy or like other political issues, but they are also like very conservative Hindus, and like as far as scriptures are concerned, they more or less have let's say on 95% of issues regarding scriptures, they have the same view as other traditionalists. The only difference is that they're probably a bit more accommodating, and they don't talk about it as often as teen trads or the scholar trads or the Chadpiller trads, right? And that's what primarily distinguishes trad lights from the other trads. So this was so till now we have done Raytas and we have done trads. Now coming to the last and final category for the night, that is the Blackpillers. So who exactly are the Blackpillers? I think first of all we need to probably just go over the definition of what exactly is a black pill. What is this entire pill system that everyone keeps on talking about, right? So many of you might have heard of these terms: blue pill, red pill, white pill, black pill, purple pill. So what does all of this exactly mean? Where does all of this come from? Right? So this is actually a terminology which originates from a movie. So many of you might have watched it, called The Matrix, right? And so in The Matrix, so the protagonist is given a choice between two pills. So one pill is the red pill and the other is a blue pill. So if he takes the blue pill, he gets to stay in the world, which is actually, and in this movie, the world is actually a simulation. That's not the real world, right? So to go beyond the simulation, and the simulation is like a very normal, ordinary world, right? Nothing really exciting really happens, but it's, things are going on. Like there's no unnecessary stress, there's no unnecessary problems. It's a normal world, right? So that's the blue pill. The red pill, on the other hand, takes you out of the simulation into the real world, and the real world is a gone case. It's quite fucked. So basically, the protagonist ends up taking the red pill, and obviously then he exits the simulation and so on and so forth. And then they show that, I don't want to spoil the movie for the people who have not watched the movie, but in general, this is just how it goes, right? That he takes the red pill, and then there's basically artificial intelligence which is taken over the world and is basically running a simulation, right, in which all these real human beings are stuck. So basically the idea is that it's basically man versus machine. So they have to kind of fight with the machines to free humanity and whatnot. I'll not go into too much details, but the basic idea is that the red pill means accepting the bitter truth, the truth which might feel uncomfortable, which might take you out of your naive but comfortable beliefs, right? It's basically something which ends that period of naivete and that comfortable ignorance for you, right? That's the red pill. And the blue pill, basically, again, it's the exact opposite. Blue pill means that you decide to stay with ideas which feel nice and comfortable, and you don't try to go beyond that comfort zone. You don't try to figure out what are uncomfortable truths and uncomfortable things. So this is the red pill and the blue pill. Now later on, people came up with another thing, which is the black pill. So the black pill is an absolutely bleak and pessimistic worldview, right? So for example, if you look at it from a Western political point of view, like so for example, take a young man, let's say, who just has a bachelor's degree in some subject which is not very much in demand. And for in his case, the black pill thing could be that it's almost impossible to get a job without a master's degree, or let's say without relevant experience. And like in the earlier days during the I guess the booming 60s, and that post World War II period, when the boomers were able to support a middle class lifestyle just on the basis of a factory job which didn't even require a college degree. So compared to that period, you have this period where this person must even with a bachelor's degree, he has to compete with illegal Mexican immigrants for low paying fast food jobs, and he has to live in a rented house with three or four other sharing with three or four other people, because it's completely unaffordable. And it's just like a vicious never ending cycle, right? And this is a very stereotypical kind of example of a young person, probably from the majority racial or ethnic group in a Western country, who'll say that I'm black belt because of such and such a reason. My country's economic situation is so bad, and they're replacing us with foreigners, and women have all become promiscuous, and there's no point in starting a family. That is black pilled. That means you've kind of lost all hope, and you're pessimistic about the future. You don't think that anything can really save the system, anything can really save society at that point, right? So black pillars on the Indian side, on the Hindu side, are basically who have the same opinion but about Indian society, about Hindu society, or about the Indian state. So with black pillars, you'll notice that they'll always be talking about things from a very nihilistic kind of point of view, that it doesn't matter if Modi comes or Yogi comes or whichever leader comes into power, we are all doomed, and it's all gloomy. And if anything, like most black pillars in fact believe that it doesn't matter Modi, Yogi, like the next guy is probably going to be even worse. So this is something which many black pillars say, and they say this in all seriousness, is that the monk will be worse than Modi. Or there's another way they say it, but basically the idea is that Yogi will be even worse than Modi, or that maybe if Shah comes, then Shah will even be worse. And like everything which the RSS does is extremely counterproductive, and whatever ways we are thinking of or even trying to solve the problem will get us nowhere. There is no solution. The only way is to emigrate out of India and try and do something abroad. The the country is a complete basket case. There is no saving this society. In the future, upper castes and Hindus are all doomed. We've already been losing for so long. There's really no point in continuously struggling so much, because the end is near anyways, and we can't really turn things around. So this is like the way that a typical black pillar thinks, right? So this is basically how a typical black pillar thinks, right? And the other thing about black pillars I'd have to add is that black pillars, this is from a very small sample size. The thing with black pillars is that they're an even smaller group compared to the trads. So the biggest group is obviously the Raytas, because they have, their ideology is in power. So obviously there's a lot of money and influence which is being peddled all around. So obviously it attracts a lot of people. Then there are the trads. So the trads have been better established compared to the black pillars, because obviously earlier on people still had a lot of hopes that the Modi government, or maybe that this is a Hindutva government which is going to change things into towards a more traditionalist direction, right? But obviously then over time people started getting more and more pessimistic, and especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated lockdown and economic crisis, and record high unemployment, etc., etc. So I think all of these things have kind of contributed to the black pillars also now having become a major faction, right? And I think that obviously, like I've noticed in the last couple of months, that the black pillars have certainly become much more direct in saying these things, which earlier on they'd maybe only say to each other or in smaller groups, right? So they've become much more direct, much more blunt. And another thing which I've noticed about the black pillars is that black pillars generally tend to come from, I think, more, I won't necessarily say more well-to-do backgrounds, but I definitely think they tend to come from the professional sphere, or many of them are actually already either established abroad, or many of them are actually coming from sort of, I guess, upper middle class, upper class kind of backgrounds, right? So they do tend to come from families which are reasonably well established. At least this is how it seems to me, and they seem to be like probably very well educated as a group of people. And I'm not saying this because I necessarily agree with everything which they say. I'm just saying this because this is how I perceive the core demographic of the Blackpiller group to be, right, compared to other factions of the Hindu right. Now, having really gone over the definition of what exactly is this group of people called the Blackpillers, there is another associated term which gets thrown around a lot, which is Hindu NRX or Hindu Neoreaction or Hindu Neoreactionaries. Right? So first of all, before understanding what Hindu neo-reaction is, you need to understand what is neo-reaction. And before understanding neo-reaction, you need to understand what is reaction, like what is reactionary thought, right? So reactionary thought is, I mean, it's a pretty wide umbrella term which is used to define like a bunch of different thinkers and ideologies which go against the Enlightenment ideals, and which kind of also like go against mainstream progressive and liberal ideals, right? So the reactionaries are reacting against society becoming sexually more open. They're reacting against the breakdown of family values. They are reacting against the atomization of the individual. They're reacting against this hyper urbanization and hyper capitalism, right? So that is where originally reactionary thought comes from. Now that we've understood what was the reactionary movement, it comes down to understanding what is neo-reaction, right? So neo-reaction is primarily a movement which is centered around the works of several core philosophers. I'll name two or three of them. So, for example, some of you might have heard of Nick Land. Some of you might have heard of Curtis Yarvin, who also goes by his pen name, Mencius Moldbug. And then there are a bunch of others. For example, there is Spandrel, there is Anatoly Karlin. To some extent, there's obviously also Steve Saylor, and there are a bunch of Western thinkers who. And the common thing is that all of them generally tend to be vocally critical of modern day Western democracy. All of them are generally quite aware about scientific differences, scientific biological differences in different races, in different ethnic groups, and even like amongst the genders themselves. So the two primary characteristics are that they don't really believe in this idea that modern day liberal democracy is the best political system possible. They don't believe that equality is something that should be a guaranteed outcome. But one thing which kind of really differentiates the neo-reactionaries from the reactionaries is that the neo-reactionaries kind of have a new vision for the world. So it's not that the neo-reactionaries just believe in opposing something, right? They also have something to offer. They have a newer vision of how society should be, of how an ideal state should be, of how global geopolitics should be reorganized. And while creating that vision, they obviously take many inputs from what their understanding of a happy, stable society in the earlier years was, right? But they don't want to copy that blindly. They don't necessarily want to entirely go back to that, primarily because they think that either it's just not possible to do that in the modern world, or they think that it's not entirely desirable to do that, to completely go back to how things used to be. So this is basically an explanation of the Western neo-reactionaries. Right now, the Hindu neo-reactionaries, I mean, I think the term in many ways is probably misapplied to Hindu neo-reactionaries, primarily because I have not seen that kind of intellectual work amongst the people who are known as the Hindu neo-reactionary movement or the Hindu NRX in developing an alternate vision for what Hindu society should be like, or what a Hindu state should be like, right? So, I mean, again, with neo-reactionaries on the Indian or the Hindu side, again, it goes more and more black pilled. It's a vision of impending doom and gloom. It's a vision of a society which is on its last legs. It's a vision of society where, all sorts of political ideologies have been tried and tested, but nothing is really working out. It's a vision of a society where all the different political parties and factions are basically trying to vie with each other for rent seeking and, marginal monetary and political influence. So there's basically not really much hope left, right? So basically, I would personally say that the term Hindu neo-reaction does not really mean anything. I think Hindu neo-reactionaries and Blackpillers on the Hindu right wing side are essentially the same group of people. There's not really any real distinction as of now, which I have seen. So I think it's probably just best to just keep on calling this group of people the Blackpillers. Uh, Last but not the least, an associated point which I probably should have mentioned earlier is that someone who is kind of known as the father of the Hindu neo-reaction, or maybe just the Black Pillar movement, is someone known as Pagun. So Pagun is supposed to be an anonymous writer who used to, I think, post on Quora and Twitter and I don't know, other platforms as well, probably, who was one of the first people who kind of really came out with this really pessimistic and, bleak view of multiple state failures, and how we've not really been able to solve core fundamental problems which affect Hindu society and the Indian state, and how things will only get worse and worse, right? So he was actually one of the first people to do it, and he kind of, I think, gained prominence amongst a strong core group of followers. And even though I think he has probably had multiple handles time and again, so it's not really possible. He might even be active on Quora or Twitter right now, but like most of us don't even know it, right? So last I remember, I think a couple of months ago, there was like a handle which you knew was Pagun talking, and he was pretty active on that. But then he had some kind of, I think, altercation with a different faction. I think the Chadpillers or someone like that, and they threatened to dox him, and then it kind of got too ugly too soon. So he decided to deactivate once again. And I think this kind of thing has happened to him multiple number of times. But I think that probably Pagun is not someone who is going to really give up on expressing his ideas in public, especially during a time like this, when the audience is really ripe for more pessimistic and kind of black pilled material, given the current economic crisis and pandemic, etc., etc. Maybe he'll do it through his followers. Maybe he'll do it through some alternate handles which we won't even know that this is actually Pagun. So one thing that which I can tell you, if you want to, I guess, identify someone as a black pillar or as someone as a Pagun follower, is that very often many of these people might have a picture of an animal like a cat or a monkey or something, right? And I know, I mean, like a lot of people have cat photos and monkey photos and all, but you can kind of associate it with those kind of tweets, right? Someone who is continuously going on a pessimistic flow and has a picture of a cat, then that person is probably a black pillar, like a Hindu black pillar who's a follower of Pagun. And similarly, another faction which you can kind of recognize by their profile pictures many times is actually the teen trads, because many of them are also anime fans. So and because they're anonymous or pseudonymous, they generally tend to have pictures of either some deity, or they have pictures of some kind of anime scene or anime character. So the anime character thing is also quite common. Deities obviously are very common, because I mean, obviously the orthodox religious angle defines the movement. But teen trads, many of them I've noticed, are also quite fascinated by anime. And with that, I guess we've already discussed all the major factions and sub factions which are active on the Hindu right. And I think towards the conclusion, I'd just like to add a few lines about what I think will change in the coming years, and the direction that all of this is moving towards. So I don't think that any radically new factions are going to emerge. Although I do think that there is a possibility that within the Blackpillers themselves, there will emerge two different sub factions. One will be a proper neo-reactionary faction, which will have like a large corpus of writing and ideas about an alternate vision, a more archaeo-futuristic vision for Hindu society and the Hindu state. And I think these kind of people might be able to pull off creating a very sizable alternate ecosystem. And then obviously the normal black pillar pessimistic group will continue to exist side by side. With regard to the normal Raytas, IT cell people, and the trads, teen trads, Chadpillers, etc., etc., I think the trads will keep on chipping away at the Raytas. And I think this is very important to mention that 80-90% of the people on all these social media platforms, they are not that heavily engrossed or involved in politics, right? So they don't fall in any one of these categories. Even though they might have a light-hearted, they might have a light interest towards politics. They do not necessarily call themselves trads, Raytas, Chadpillers, Blackpiller, whatever, and they don't even necessarily occupy themselves with politics and religion like 90% of the time. So I think that this is a huge group which can be taken either way. So that they're almost like in a way, I don't want to like call them sheep, but as far as intellectual discourse is concerned, I think you can call them sheep, because they have other things to do which they're busy doing. So they'd rather that someone just told them that this is probably the right way to think. And I think more and more of these people will get attracted towards trads, and particularly the scholarly trads. And I think even many of the teen trads will quickly develop into scholarly trads. And I think the chat pillars probably will also continue to moderate as they grow older and older. And obviously, instead of the teen trads, we might have newer groups of trads which you do the dirty work to who operate in a very confrontational way on the ground. But in general, I think as the trad movement also becomes more mainstream, I think the more moderate and sort of non-confrontational people among these groups might become more prominent. And I think the trad movement as a whole will continue to gain like followers in massive numbers. I think sooner rather than later, you'll see trads who have 20, 30, 40,000 followers on Twitter. And similarly trads who on YouTube with thousands or tens of thousands of subscribers. And I think it might I'll even go as far as saying as that they might actually have a very strong practical real world impact, in the sense of, to some extent, reversing the modernization, the westernization of many Indian communities. I think some of them might even be able to pull that off. That would certainly be something interesting to watch out for. And as far as Raytas and IT Cell and neoliberal people and all of these guys are concerned, I think they'll keep on moderating more and more, and I think they'll keep on losing more and more followers to the trads. I think sooner rather than later, there will come a time when many of them will probably think maybe it's a better idea to just kind of withdraw from the entire space itself, because of the amount of hate that people will have for them, and the amount of opposition that will be there for their ideas. But I mean, obviously they will still have mainstream government support and everything, but I still kind of feel that many of them may not continue for very long, and many of them might actually just withdraw, or maybe even defect to another faction, or an entirely different ideology altogether. And this is basically how I see the entire faction system on the Hindu right evolving over the next couple of years. And as I said, I don't see very drastic changes happening, but I do see certain factions gaining at the expense of others, and I do also kind of see a new, more real Hindu neo-reactionary movement emerging over the next couple of years. So with that, I'll bid adieu, guys. I hope you enjoyed listening in. I know this was a very, very long episode, but unfortunately, I mean, this is a very long and convoluted topic. So I mean, I guess I had to spend this much of time trying to explain everything, and trying to kind of go into details and even give you guys my predictions. So again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.